Here we have another video in the video cameo series of YouTubers worth listening to. Simon Webb.
Hello, my name is Simon Webb. I've written a lot of books about little known aspects of British history. This series will look at some of the most famous people and incidents in this country's history. I hope to show that the popular view of history with which we are all familiar is not necessarily the correct one. A lot of what I see these days in Britain puts me in mind of the old Soviet Union and its allies. The slogans are so vague and well-meaning and wishy-washy that although they actually say nothing at all, only a heartless bastard would disagree with them. You know the kind of thing, forward with the people, or peace and freedom for all. Obviously, few of us are in favour of war and slavery, so we can hardly disagree with the sentiments expressed. Here's a recent iteration of this tendency. It's a book for children under the age of 11 called A Peaceful World. A lot of the book is really directed towards teachers, giving them ideas for things such as debates where neither side wins and non-competitive games, that kind of thing. Some of what is said, though, is odd, and some actually consists of deliberate lies. Here's an example of something which is odd, considering that it is aimed at children under the age of 11. In the glossary here, it gives a definition of sexual orientation. Do remember that this book is intended for children under the age of 11, by the way. This is the story of the slave trade between Europe and Africa, a tragic tale of coastal villages raided and men, women and children carried off into captivity, loaded onto ships, taken to be sold as slaves in another continent and never seeing their homes again. A familiar enough narrative, except that in this case the villages being depopulated in this way were English, and the slave traders arrived in ships which had sailed from Africa. Long before the British ever became involved in the slave trade, slavers out of Africa were raiding not only the British Isles but many other European countries, from Iceland to Malta, Ireland to Spain and Italy to the Netherlands, carrying off white slaves to be sold in the slave markets of Africa. The same thing with Barbary pirates. The word pirate is faintly comical, bringing to mind Long John Silver, Captain Hook, even Captain Pugwash. Pirates raised the skull and crossbones flag and hunted for treasure, didn't they? The Barbary pirates were actually after people, white Christians specifically, who could be sold as slaves in Muslim countries. Here were some white slaves in Africa during the 17th century. There was a very old tradition of slavery in Africa, long before the coming of Europeans. Black empires enslaved neighbouring nations, various tribes made slaves of outsiders, the Arabs took black people for slaves, and sometimes the other way round. Slavery was an old African tradition, and it is not to be wondered at that it flourished on what became known as the Barbary Coast. The coast was named after the Berbers who originally lived there, and included countries like Algeria, Tunisia and modern-day Morocco. From ports there, Muslims set off to Europe to seize as many white Christians as they could for the slave markets of North Africa. How extensive was this trade? Was it a trifling affair of a few hundred people here and there? Hardly. The island of Gozo, part of modern Malta, was attacked in July 1551 and the entire population of 5,000 people taken off into slavery. This was a serious problem for Europe, especially the Mediterranean countries, but also for Britain and even Iceland. Current estimates suggest that the number of Europeans captured and taken to Africa numbered in the millions. The Barbary pirates attacked shipping as well as land, and were in the habit of taking the crews of ships and then just leaving the ships drifting on the ocean. In Britain, for instance, the fishing industry was under serious threat in the 17th century. For example, at Mounts Bay in Cornwall, 60 men, women and children were taken away. In 1626, St. Kevin was repeatedly attacked, and boats out of Loo, Penzance, Mousel and so on were all at risk of being seized by pirates. It was thought at the time that around 60 Barbary men-of-war ships were prowling the coast of Britain in the 17th century. Sir John Eliot, Vice Admiral of Devon, declared that the seas around England seemed to be theirs. We think of Pirate Island as being in the Caribbean, but for a while the Isle of Lundy in the Bristol Channel was held by the Barbary pirates and used as their base. In 1645, another raid by Barbary pirates on the Cornish coast saw 240 men, women and children kidnapped. To keep the slave population stable, around 1/4 had to be replaced each year, which for the period from 1580 to 1680 meant around 8,500 new slaves each year, a total of 850,000 in the course of the century. According to one estimate, 7,000 English people were abducted between
For some of those living in London, parts of the borough of Tower Hamlets are pretty much off limits. In the past, signs have been put up on lampposts warning that Sharia law is enforced, and last month a homosexual man was beaten to death in what police suspect to be a homophobic murder. There have been religiously motivated attacks on gay people this year, and girls have been shouted and sworn at if their clothing is considered a little too provocative. There are 23 members of the cabinet in Britain. These men and women are, in effect, what we mean when we refer to the government. 6 of them, over a quarter, belong to visible minorities. The latest addition is a man who has lately been appointed Secretary of State for Education, Nadim Zahawi, who was born in Baghdad. Odd that somebody whose first language is not English should be in charge of education in Britain. I truly do not think that anybody who was not born into an English-speaking household in Britain can really appreciate all the finer grammatical points and subtle nuances of English. Seriously, I cannot for the life of me see why you would choose an Iraqi for this role rather than an English person. In Germany, there are 15 members of the cabinet, and every single one of them is a white German of German origin. Quite right too. The same applies to every other country in Europe. In Britain alone is there what looks like a determination to reduce the number of white British people in the government and replace them with Iraqis, Indians and Pakistanis. Why is this? The percentage of visible minorities in the cabinet jumped at the last reshuffle from 1/5 to over a quarter, and I suspect it will not be long before it reaches half. Is this sheer chance, or is it part of some plan about which the rest of us know nothing?
So perhaps if you haven't heard of the horrific enslavement of white Europeans by Africans, you might not have fully understood the relevance of the lyrics of Rule Britannia. Why not watch Simon's full video? Links in the description below. Also watch his latest video. It's about the slow but remorseless invasion of North America and Europe. Links in the description below.